So, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our session presenters for today. We have Sharon Morris, who is Director of Library Development at the Colorado State Library, and Karen Hickson, who is the Technology and Digital Initiatives Consultant for the Colorado State Library. Because I'm stumbling over my words, I am now going to hand it over to them, and they can take over the presentation from here on out.
Thank you, Christine. This is Karen. Um, so we're gonna put up a poll here, and I'm just wondering, has this ever happened to you? Like you tell somebody that you work at a library, like you're at a party, and they're like, "What do you do?" And you go, "Oh, I work at the library," and they go, "Oh my gosh, the library has changed my life." So if you just want to go ahead and enter that into the poll. Yeah, there's quite a few yeses, some nos, about a fourth.
Well, this is Sharon, and looking at this, it looks like quite a few people have had that experience where somebody have said to them, the library's changed your life. I guess the other thing that would be interesting is, has the library changed your life? Certainly a library changed my life, which is why I'm a librarian, and that's often the case with a lot of people. So today, thank you for joining us from around the country and around North America, shall we say. I'm going to close this and get back to our slide deck and look at the outcomes for our session today. So um, based on today, we all know that libraries have the power and that actually you have the power to change lives and to transform communities through the work that you do in your library. And so today we're going to investigate how libraries transform lives, and you will get at least 3 tips to facilitate deeper learning, growth, and change in those who use the library. And you might actually be giving some of these tips to other people, which is what we hope will happen through the chat area because you have experience and expertise. As Christine mentioned, that we'd love to hear from. And we'll say some time at the end for you to create a plan with specific strategies you can practice in your library to be more intentional about transforming lives. So without those outcomes in mind, just real quickly, what I wanted to do was share with you this quote, which is from the American Library Association marketing campaign, Libraries Transform. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read this. So what I think is interesting about this campaign is a marketing campaign that sort of showcases what libraries are doing and how they're doing it. And it's really focused on what libraries do. But today we're really interested in how libraries do it. In particular, we're interested in what you do or what you can do to create this transformative nature that happens in your library. So that's what we're talking about today. So I'm going to hand it over to Karen now to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts.
All right. So go ahead and use that chat area, please. And let's just list out some of the reasons people come into the library. What do they come into the library for? Wi-Fi or computers, company, totally. Family history, books, yeah, books, audiobooks, DVDs, newspapers. These are often this can be really like transactional. Sometimes it's interactional. Sometimes it's just about information. Um, or learning or having a meeting, the bathroom, that's always a big one, right? Um, Sometimes they come into for creation. Maybe y'all have like a 3D printer or some way that they create stuff at your library. And just keep typing in that chat. And okay, so when we see them come in to use a computer or to check out a book or maybe to meet with other people, but what are they really coming into the library for? They may be on a computer, but are they looking for a job? Are they connecting with certain people? They might be checking out a book, but are they just, are they getting some escape fiction because their world's all jangly, or are they, trying to learn something? Are they um, getting something so that they can get some specific information to help them? They might be coming to a story time, but maybe while they're there, they're engaging in this free activity for their kids, but they're connecting with other parents, building relationship. There's what they do, and then there's what changes in their lives because of the library's connections and services. We're really good at saying, this is how many people have come in to use the computer. It's harder sometimes, I think, for libraries to say they've come in to use this computer and they've done these things and it's brought this thing into their lives. So in this session, we want to explore how it is we make these changes easier for them, how we're going to make this part of the system that we're talking about.
And I would say one of the reasons why people come into the library is for stories. So we're going to tell you a few stories. And it's great to see some of the chat and what you guys are writing. And so keep it coming. Love to see your ideas and your thoughts, and particularly some of the regional kinds of differences that we're seeing in some of the chat areas. So I wanted to share this story with you. This came from a library that I was at recently. They told me a story about this guy who was at the computer bank with other people, and he was younger, and he was raising a ruckus. He was being really loud, he was yelling, he was throwing things around, he was really upset. And so the librarian and the security guard both went over to him. And the librarian said, "Hi, how are you today?" And he said, "I am so angry. I was working on this thing and I went away for a minute and it just disappeared and the computer timed out," and he was so upset. Well, as they started to talk with him, what they found out was that he was working on a suicide note that he was going to be sending to his family. And it was sort of his last act before committing suicide. So they were able to just talk with him and calm him down. And the librarian was able to, just kind of take him over to an area to connect in with some other people that could help him to get some help and to get over the depression he was experiencing. So she listened and she was empathetic and she connected him with counseling help. And 3 weeks later, he came back into the library to thank the librarian and the security guard for helping him to find some help. And he showed them the bus ticket. And the last act he did before getting on the bus to go home was to stop in the library and thank them. I'm sure you have library stories like this as well, about times when you've transformed people's lives, and we're going to have you start thinking about those. But Kieran's now going to turn you on to a concept that we want to use as a framework for the rest of our discussion.
So before I get into the concept, I'm going to kind of tell you a little story too. A couple years ago now, my wife got very ill, and over the course of about 15 months, we were in and out of 9 hospitals in 3 different states, and it just kept getting worse. And I wasn't always the best customer in a lot of those hospitals, and there were moments where the best I could do would be to be, have this like bad customer moment. And there was one hospital that really stands out in my mind. That really their customer service was just what I needed exactly when I needed it, and it really helped me be there in a different way. And we were in that hospital for about a month, so I had time after this interaction where, well, I was pretty much ranting and raving, and the nurse I was dealing with was less worried about my ranting and raving and started asking me like how she could help me comfort my wife, which was what I needed to hear. And I was able to go back to her and ask her what kind of customer service training they get, and or what was their philosophy at this hospital, because it was so different from some of the other ones we were in. And she started telling me about trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care is basically that when they're dealing with you, they assume that this is the worst day of your life, that this is the biggest, most horrible trauma going on for you right now, and they're kind of open to that in a different way, and it stops being about the ranting and raving, really, or the behavior of the customer. So I started thinking about that in terms of how we could use that in libraries. And while it might be true, a lot of our patrons are going through a big trauma, and there is a lot of validity in trauma-informed care. I started thinking about transformational informed service and how in my life I can look back and say, I had all this stuff going on in my life. I went to a library. I found these things. So I started kind of trying to figure out what it was that a library could do to kind of systematically approach these kind of situations in the library. So I'm going to ask you in the chat now, let's kind of go back to that story that Sharon told, and think of the ways that with that young guy in the library, how the librarians really provided a transformational informed service. Um, and just kind of give me your thoughts on that. I think, I mean, the obvious thing would be to go over to somebody who's throwing a fit and be like, "You're out of here." So how is it that we can change some of those first things? Yeah, they showed some compassion. They listened. They took him aside. Active listenings. Yeah, you're probably right. They probably lowered their voice, took it down. They didn't make any assumptions.
So Rana,
That's great.
you had pointed out that they started with how can I help? But what was interesting to me is they didn't. They asked, how are you today? Just how are you doing today? Which I think is really, really interesting.
I think it's interesting that rather than responding to his behavior, that they asked him, how you're doing. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean these comments are so good. Understanding that there was a reason for his anger and sort of being curious about the reason for the anger rather than, as Kieran said, like focusing on his behavior, treating him as a person, not a statistic. That's a great way of putting it, Sharon. And this idea Adam points out in others that there's like this respectfulness with the person. And I like this idea of emotional inertia, which is pretty interesting. Like somebody's got this emotion, it's kind of moving them along, and how do you kind of be part of that inertia and then try to steer it maybe with that kind of one-on-one taking them aside thing. Sandy points out that they didn't have a mindset that he was a problem. It's kind of interesting. How many times do we see things in our library and we're like, um, that's a problem. It's a problem for us, rather than sort of saying, what problem do they have that we can assist with? Yeah, I think that is kind of interesting. Like, how are you doing today? Some people might not take it right. I think it's whatever, Janaea just has this way about her. When she said it, it kind of set him back to realize that he could have a conversation with somebody instead of being in this trauma that he was in. Those are such great comments. Thank you. Karen, do you see any other comments that you want to sort of discuss?
I think we should go on to the next.
Okay. All right. So, I love this comment, this concept of transformation informed care, and this idea that, at any time, not that everyone needs transformation when they come into the library, but just that concept that you could notice when you're first interacting with somebody, have the space for the possibility that they could be going through some kind of difficulty. And it reminded me of this model that I think about a lot, and it's based on research in libraries and some research that I've done. And it starts out with this idea that learning requires uncertainty, and actually learning requires confusion. So, if we knew it already, we wouldn't be confused, right? But what's interesting is a lot of times when people come into libraries, it's because they want to learn something, they want to find something out, and they might feel uncertain, like, how do I know what to ask, or what do I do, or whatever, and they feel confused. And sometimes what happens with people, and especially with people who are older kids or adults, is confusion can lead to frustration. And then once somebody feels frustrated, sometimes what they might do is kind of get angry at themselves and start to have self-doubt and think that they should somehow be a certain way that they're not. And so then this self-doubt then leads to this feeling of anxiety, maybe some stress. Over time, it could lead to helplessness. And helplessness leads to despair and depression. So sort of this downward spiral. So this is kind of the downward spiral of going from uncertainty to confusion, frustration, etc. Have you ever seen anybody in the library that was in any part of this downward spiral? And maybe this resonates for you because you maybe at some point have experienced the downward spiral.
Who, me? Never.
Sharon, forget other patrons. That was me. Absolutely. And it's just kind of a natural kind of mental process that happens. But it really starts with uncertainty and confusion, particularly the more uncertain and the more confused we are, the more it can ramp up our frustration and anxiety and stress and self-doubt and all those other things. So, so let's talk about the other approach to this, which is this feeling of uncertainty that we have, and looking at that uncertainty from this idea of, again, it's confusion, but, and you Canadians might use the term befuddlement. I know when I lived in England, they used the word befuddlement, and I always liked it better. I like that word befuddlement. It sounds a little bit more like the positive form of confusion. So once one becomes befuddled, one might kind of approach things as like, that's interesting. I need to be curious about, like, what more can I learn here? Like, what ways can I expand my horizon? So it's not about like, I should already know, but it's like, I have the opportunity to learn something new. And so let's explore, let's look broadly, let's discover new things and think differently about those things and notice possibility. And when we're looking at all of those possibilities, it's actually kind of opening up this idea that we have more choice and feel more empowered. And then that kind of choice and empowerment can finally lead to a decision where there's an insight and transformation. So this is one model where it's more of an upward spiral, if you will. where uncertainty and befuddlement lead to curiosity, exploration, discovery, options, possibilities, some new insight, or in some cases, if it's a really big thing, transformation. And this can happen in a variety of different ways. This is sort of the simplified version of it. And so, as we look at these two ways of responding to uncertainty and confusion, we can see that one kind of leads down and one leads up. And we might envision that there are moments where we see people experiencing some level of the downward spiral in our library. And the great thing about it is we don't have to diagnose exactly where they are in this spiral. We just have to notice if they seem kind of down. And the secret weapon in doing this is to go directly over to the upward spiral of curiosity. And if we can get folks to start to become curious, if we can be curious about what they're interested in, and together kind of form a way to do some exploration and discovery and get them into some options and possibilities, then this is a way to kind of move people up the upward spiral. So this is one concept that we wanted to share with you as a way to start to think about how to basically look at somebody and see if they're in a situation where they might be receptive to transformation, how to move them into curiosity. And maybe you have some suggestions and ideas about how to move people to curiosity from your own experience working in libraries, so feel free to add that into the chat area now.
So I used to work at the John C. Fremont Library in Florence, Colorado, and it's a pretty small library. There's about 3,000 or so folks in the town, and we had, after school you'd always get the rush of kids, but we had these two boys that would come in. They were both homeschooled, and they would come in once a week to the library at a time when other kids were usually in school, and they'd be there, and they were real great kids, but they'd always play this one video game. They would get some time to play this video game from their mom, and they always played the same video game, and that was just like what they did. And one day they came to me, and I guess they had finished the game, and they were like, "Yeah, we need the second game in this series." So I took them in the back room. I showed them, my little spreadsheet and told them, like, I have $50 a month to buy video games, and the new Batman's coming out. There's no way I'm going to be able to get your video game this month, but I can put it on the list. I can probably get it next month. In the meantime, though, and it was a Star Wars video game. I think it was some sort of Rebel Squadron thing. So I said, have you seen the graphic novels and the comic books? And they were like, no. So I took them over there, and we found the Star Wars ones, and I gave them a few of those, and they checked them out. And the next week they came back, and they're like, okay, we need number 7 in this series, number 3 in this other series. X-wing fighters needs them, and they gave me the whole thing. And so I took them back into the back room again, and I opened my little spreadsheet, and I was like, okay, so comic books, like I can get this one that you're talking about, and which one of these, would you like to prioritize? Because I can only do, we can only get a couple, and then next month we can get these other ones, because I have to get the, if I don't get X-Men, I will be like, hung by some children, I'm sure, killed one way or the other. So we kind of kept going like that, and they had read all the comic books, and I said, well, have you read the books? And I haven't read the Star Wars books, So I take him over to the science fiction section, and that's kind of when I realized that they're probably like 10 and 8 years old. And I'm thinking, I wonder if they can read this, like what their level, is. So I grab one of the books and I hand it to the taller kid, and I'm like, can you read this? And he flipped it open and was like, yeah. So they left with a armload of books. And the next week they come in, and their mom wants to talk to me. And I have this sinking feeling. I'm like, oh my gosh, I gave children adult books. I'm certainly doomed. Like, I don't really know what's going to happen next, but I'm certainly doomed. And as she comes towards me, I'm sort of backing up into my office and hoping that we can have this, what's going to be, I'm sure I'm going to get yelled at, right? If we can have it privately in my office instead of out in the middle of everything. And she comes towards me and she's like, I just wanted to tell you, it's so wonderful. My two boys, they turned off the TV and they were reading to each other. And I think just that's amazing. And I'm sure that all of you have some story like that where you helped somebody in some sort of transformational way. One of the boys told me, that that's what got him into like reading books. And it wasn't me. It was totally the Star Wars universe that George Lucas built for them. And they would follow it across every media that there was. I just had to point out the media. It's not just the games, or not just the comic books, just keep going with it. So I want you guys to just kind of take this little journey with me and close your eyes and kind of think of a time when you helped someone in a transformational way. All right. Does everybody have their story? All right.
Okay, so we're not going to ask you to share your story in the chat area, although that would be great. We just, in the interest of time, what we're interested in is not necessarily the specifics of the story, but what were the conditions in the library, and or what actions did you take to make that transformation possible? Like, what were the things that you did or that they had access to that helped them to transform? Just give you some time to type that out in the chat area, and we will enjoy seeing the wide variety of things that are going on in your library and actions you're taking that help lead to transformation. Knowing the resources we have and having the time to connect with the patron with them. Absolutely, that's kind of two things, like knowing the resources, but also that one-on-one connection with the patron around those resources. Asking questions to really understand where they're at, as well as what they're wanting, and what they're hoping to accomplish. Absolutely, Jamie, thank you for that. And Christine suggests that sometimes it requires bending or breaking a rule. Certainly in our research with low-income parents of very young children, we found that fines are a barrier, and often sometimes people will remove the fines or fees in somebody's card in order to give them the possibility of continuing to use the library. Oh, Kelly, just today you helped somebody who had a child who was a dyslexic reader, and you helped to open up their awareness of services. Yeah, so knowing those services and opening up that awareness, and really, like, well, we don't always recommend you stop eating your lunch, but really taking the time. That seems to be a theme here with you guys as you're writing these out. Knowing the way the libraries are set up and really helping to walk people through that. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, David. Thank you for that. Library Genie, Dana. That's great. So Library Genie is like a resource that you have that really does help people. So some of it's infrastructure in your library and policies, and some of it's decisions that you made in the moment to give them a little bit more time and attention, along with your own knowledge and skill set that you bring to the position.
Sometimes
I
it's
like
that encouragement,
empathy, absolutely. And I like this idea of the fact that I don't A Pierce, I'm sorry, I don't remember your first name, but that there was this multi-generational road trip, and recommending audiobooks that the whole family would enjoy is really something that has shifted them into like regularly listening to things together. It's just such an amazing way of bringing a family together in a shared experience with story. That's really powerful.
And Sandy, I agree with you. Just knowing someone will try on your behalf. I think even with those kids, giving them the respect and showing them, like it isn't that I'm not going to get you the thing you're asking for. It's that I will, but this is, the reality of a small library. I can't right now, probably any library, honestly. Um, and then leading them to something else.
And Jenny points out, this kind of shift away from like having people on the floor just to do circulation, but to really be more spontaneous about learning and problem solving. And that's a really big shift in libraries, and it's a powerful one to make that kind of transformation happen. Yeah. These are really great ideas. Thank you for sharing those.
So, we've presented and asked that question, I think, to about 150 library folk, and these have been some of the key words that we've heard from them about, what conditions in the library or what actions you can take to make transformation possible. And I see very similar. Some of them are very similar to the ones you all gave, and you all came up with some other ones too.
Yeah, this is great just to read your stories and to hear what you guys are doing. And we'll probably add to our word cloud that we have here with your different things. So, when I just take a little moment to pause and summarize some of the key points so far of what we wanted to say before we get into some application. So, first of all, libraries are really more about than the sum of the services we provide. They're really about the results that occur because of those services. Libraries really truly are about transformation. And the true nature of the library is transformation. So another thing is by focusing on transformational informed service, we can be more intentional every day in our libraries by sort of like just noticing the possibility that somebody could be in a traumatic situation or in a frustrated situation and having the space for that, and understanding that sometimes if they're behaving in a certain way, it's not they're the behavior that's the problem. They have some kind of problem that's causing that behavior. And if we can be curious about what their true need is and frustration is, we can move them forward in a way that could be transformative. That moving people up the spiral really starts with curiosity, understanding where they might be kind of heading downward and kind of getting them to curious and the upward spiral of exploration and options. And finally, you already make transformation happen in your libraries. How can you create systems to promote transformation as a regular part of your services? So in other words, we're describing all these ways that you created transformation, but how do we make it more systemic?
Oops. All right. So how can we make this a little more intentional? How can we make it practical? I think that those spirals, we have a lot of big ideas kind of to chew on now, and I'm kind of wondering how that we implement that. Um, so go ahead in the chat box if you have any ideas on how you can kind of offer this transformational informed library service. Um, and like when I've been thinking about it, I've been thinking in that story I told about the kids playing the Star Wars video game. I wish when I think back on it, I wish I had uh, I mean interrupted a little sooner, I guess is the word. I know we tend to think a lot of times that we can't be nosy, and while we do need to be discreet, we can be a little nosy. I know I used to sit at the circ desk at the John C. Fremont Library, and I would see kids on the computer and they're playing that same game over and over for hours. And I wonder, if I had interrupted a little and kind of been a little bit nosy, if I'd have gotten farther. And sometimes people just need to sit there and play a video game. I'm totally know that. And sometimes they need a little bit of help to find something else.
Yeah, absolutely, Kieran. And I don't even think of that as nosy. I think of it as sort of like hospitality. There's people in your library, and as if these people came to your home, wouldn't you interact with them and engage with them? I really like what Norma says about, she's kind of realized this idea of being out on the floor instead of behind the desk is one way to, express that hospitality and that interest in people in a way that builds that connection that has the possibility of leading to transformative interactions. I think a lot of people seem to resonate with what Creed wrote about recommending that everyone that works in the library just think small, small favors, small assistance, and that these steps, kind of add up. And this idea that there are these that if they think about these small favors, it actually changes the library staff too to make that just a part of their everyday work, and they find meaning in that.
Yeah, I heard this term just the other night, unconditional positive regard, and it's a load of word there, but I like that idea of just unconditionally giving this regard to a person in a positive way. Just like I think that really helps people. And I know sometimes when I've been in that downward spiral, just that just that person being there and being willing to help in some ways, it means so much.
Yeah, and a lot of you guys are putting in these creative ideas and services you offer, like having a social worker there, but and some of the other programs that you offer that really make a difference. And I also think it's really interesting, Meg, you point out this concept of yes and, meaning not only find a way to say yes, but to go beyond, one step beyond yes, to do a little bit more or give a little bit more than what people ask for. And Elaine mentioned that earlier in the session about how she tries to not only give people what they ask for, but also anticipate what else they might be interested in that they don't know to ask for, which I think is really powerful. This is really cool, Norma, that you give newcomers a tour of the library so that you start to build a relationship with them. And that tour is like inviting them to have it be their space too. And again, that's part of that hospitality, greeting patrons and wishing them farewell as they enter and exit. Kelly, absolutely, as a way of creating a welcoming and safe kind of experience and sharing that hospitality and starting to build those relationships and those connections. These are really great. This curbside service, Jamie, that's pretty fascinating. And also getting out. I appreciate that Dana said that about getting out and going to see people in other parts of the community. Absolutely, mindfulness, as Sandy points out, all of this requires us to be really aware and alert in the moment. And like I can't remember who had said earlier, like she stopped eating her lunch to do a little bit more for the patron. That was an act of mindfulness in that moment, sort of deciding like I'm really hungry, but this person needs a little more help, and I can come back to my food. So it's a really great example of mindfulness.
And yeah, definitely here, E. Pierce, partnering with the local businesses and services to bring the library into the community, like the book club at the coffee shop and trivia at the bar. Those are good things.
So there's a question for Jamie on his curbside service, just the logistics of that. And Jamie, if you wouldn't mind typing a little bit more. Yeah, oh, you did. Yeah, great, thanks. So again, how might you do this more in your library more intentionally, meaning what systemic thing can you do over the next week to expose others to this concept of transformation informed care and this model of, getting people from confusion to curiosity? So we're going to try and get this down to sort of like, what can you do in the next week? Let's give you a time frame for planning, something you might do differently based on what we talked about. And Karen's got some suggestions from other places.
So one of the libraries, well, they have a chalkboard in the what they call the staff room, which is actually the staff bathroom. Um, so the director put up instead of, and then went through the downward spiral. What if? And we went, and then goes through that upward spiral. I think kind of trying to a lot of these things we do, I think some of us do it in a natural way. Like you see somebody and you just say, "Oh, like welcome to the library," and I'm wondering like how to push that more towards kind of being more intentional and kind of setting up ways that intentionally we can look for these moments where we can have this transformational informed service. I know one of the libraries, she she had been a person who had just moved to the country and had a kid, and she realized that she wasn't having any social interaction with adults. And so she started hanging out at the library, and now she's a librarian and working at the library. And she's realizes that like when people come in, that chatting is okay. It's part of her job. She doesn't need to not just hang out and talk with people, even though sometimes in a job, you feel like you're just hanging out talking to somebody like that's not you're not doing your work or whatever. And she got over that by realizing that being chatty, that talking is actually part of her work to make somebody feel welcome and have that social interaction for their day. And just go ahead and write in chat, what other ideas you all have.
I love that a lot of you are adding comments about sort of that moment when somebody gets their first library card and how you can give them a tour, maybe have a welcome packet for them. It's true that that first time somebody, you have the opportunity, whether you're doing outreach and you're at a fair and you're giving people a library card, or they're coming into the library, that to get a library card, that is like a golden moment to start building relationship. Not have that just be a transaction, but have it be an experience for them, an experience of feeling like they are a member now of the library club. Um, I I think it's just kind of interesting to kind of treat people more as if they're part of the ownership of the space and of what the library is for them, where they feel more of a personal connection to it. Yeah,
And,
right.
and
Go ahead.
Norma points out that maybe listening more and talking less rather than chatting. Absolutely.
Remember on our um, on our word cloud about the best way to like help people get to transformation, listening is one of the standard ones we hear from everyone. Really noticing and listening. Yeah,
I like Pat's idea that changing even just that language from transaction to interaction.
yeah. The description of interacting rather than transaction, absolutely. And even, like from transaction to relationship. Yeah. A good point, David, about being tactful and So these are great comments. Just keep them coming. And I guess the question is, we're talking kind of more abstractly about what we're going to do, but like, how are you going to do this in your work in the next couple of weeks? Like, how are you going to be more intentional in your work? And Pat, I think it's a good point to say, when I talk about relationship, I'm not talking about a personal relationship so much as a kind of a professional regard kind of relationship, where people know that they can count on a person, that the person, that when you go into the library, you know, somebody's going to respect you, they're going to encourage you, they're going to care enough about you to help you. And that can be life changing, particularly for some children who may not have as many resources or things. Just having somebody notice them and smile at them and welcome them and say, I'm glad you're here. Even if at the time the kid, you know, the teenager is scowling at you or something, inside they feel acknowledgement in a way that can really make a difference in their life. And that adds up over time. All right, these are such great comments. Thank you for adding all of these ideas. So just to kind of restate what we hoped would come out of this is really a clearer understanding of how libraries transform. And you all created a lot of lists and descriptions of how you are doing library transformation, the things that you're doing. And we're going to take this chat that you're doing and we're going to post it on the website so we can go back and read it. And I mean, we, like all of us, you guys too, go back and read it and get ideas and more understanding of how we're changing and transforming through libraries. And hopefully through this process of hearing other people's ideas, as well as some of the concepts that Kieran and I gave you about transformation-informed service and about this learning upward and downward spirals, you have at least 3 tips to facilitate deeper learning, growth, and positive change in those who are using your library. And also, we hope that you've had some insights of your own today that help you to plan for specific strategies you can practice in your library to be more systemic about having more transformational moments for the people who use your library. Kieran, did you have any other comments from some of the stuff that people are posting?
I like what Christy just put in about bringing kids coloring or activity sheets, or even, you know, taking that moment to do, you know, impromptu story time or something like that. I think a lot of times I've seen kids just sort of stuck there, whether they're waiting after school for a parent, or they, you know, they've been dropped off, or their parents trying to accomplish some very necessary task, or whatever, and they don't quite know what to do. And I think particularly children need a little guidance in that moment of when they're just, you know, kind of in that waiting place.
Now, I'm just, because we have a little bit of time, I'm going to tell another story. And actually, I think Pete's on this, so I'm going to tell your story, Pete. There was, you know, a library in an area near a park. And one day a boy was in the library and he was kind of younger. He was like around 9 or 10 years old, and he was in the library, and he was in the library all day long. And the library staff came and said something to the branch manager, and the branch manager went up and said, you know, you can't just be here on your own. What's going on? And the boy said, well, this is a school week where school is out, but my mom has to work, so she dropped me off at the library thinking that it would be okay for me to stay here. And so the branch manager called the mom and said, you know, we can't be responsible for your child in the library, so you're going to have to pick him up, and you can't just drop him off at the library at any time. We welcome you to come in with your child. And so the mom came and picked up her child. The next day, the staff, and it was kind of a cold day, and the staff came to the branch manager and said, you know, we have a problem. That same boy is now outside in the park, and it's really cold, and we want to invite him in. And what do we do? And the branch manager was like, she went out and said, you know, it's really cold. Do you want to come into the library? And the little boy said, no, I can't come into the library. I will get in trouble. My mom told me to never go into the library because I'll get in trouble. Certainly like the last thing we wanted in this situation, right? And so the branch manager, you know, brought him in and said, we're not going to get you in trouble, and called her supervisor and said, what do we do about this? And her supervisor said, well, what other things could we, you know, what's the real problem here? And the real problem is not that this child is unattended in the library. The real problem is that this child's mother can't afford childcare for her son, when he's not in school. So can we use our resources to look for another place for this child to be that is economical, so that she could have a place for her son when she's at work? And so with that kind of redefining what the real problem was, they were able to identify a place for the boy to go during that week where he would be part of a childcare setting and do other things, and there was no cost to the mom. So again, I just want to reiterate that story kind of, to me, talks about this idea that sometimes people are just sort of looking at things very narrowly. And if we really look at what the true problem is, which is usually not a library problem, it's a problem with a person, and we sort of like look at what resources are available to us, and we're the experts on looking for resources. So again, remember that upward spiral part about being curious about options and looking at possibilities more broadly and what resources could we bring to this. We're not on our own in the library. There's other agencies that we can call on to assist with these things. Then it can expand the possibility of what we can make possible. So it doesn't just have to be the library that transforms. It can be kind of a community effort when we acknowledge and start to work on a major problem.
And that was really good use of their reference skills too. You know,
right.
That
so,
to do.
Thank you, Meg, for thanking us for this. We really appreciate your participation and your ideas and concepts. It's awesome to have, you know, so many people from around the country and also in Canada sharing ideas about transformation, because we really feel like this is the primary role that the public, that libraries play in people's lives. And Kieran, I'll let you say thank you too.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody. I really hope that in this moment you were able to see some ways that we can kind of codify those spirals and see how we can make that transformation happen. Thank you.
There's a little bit more wrap up, so hang on while we hand it over to Christine.